Matthew chapter 26, verses 38 to 44, we find Jesus on the verge of entering into his most trying experience. It is a time that one author describes as the hour of the power of darkness. At that point in time, Jesus' soul was so sorrowful that he said that he was at the point of death. In his weakness, he turns to prayer as a source of refuge and strength. Prayer was always a fundamental part of Jesus' life as well as his public ministry. And in Gethsemane, it was no different. As we studied the prayer life of Jesus in Gethsemane, we can learn many valuable lessons and many valuable principles that can help us to have strength when we are also similarly tested. There are many things that we can learn, but I want to pull out just a few. The first is from the observation that when Jesus knew that his time had come, he took his disciples with him to pray for themselves and as well for him. Jesus placed emphasis on united prayer. We see that Christianity is something that is not experienced in isolation, but rather in cooperation and in unison with those people who are around us. There is power in united prayer, and there's also a blessing in the corporate worship experience. And so we should not neglect to surround ourselves with individuals who can strengthen us in our times of need, and also individuals whom we can strengthen when they're also similarly in need as well. And yet, having said this, Jesus still, when he takes his 11 disciples, he then takes the 3 who were closest to him, Peter, James, and John, and they go a little bit of a distance away from the remaining 8. Then he separates himself further still from those 3, and he goes alone to pray at distance from them. See, what we see from this is that although united prayer is important, although the corporate worship experience is important, it can never be a substitute for the personal devotion that we also need to have. See, one person once said that public prayer is only effective if it is founded upon and followed up by personal, private, prevailing prayer. And so we should never neglect in our own lives to develop habits of devotion that will enable us to resist temptation. And so we see that there is importance in united prayer, but there's also a necessity for personal and private prayer. The second thing that we learn from Jesus is that when he told his disciples to pray, he didn't just say to them, pray, but he said that they should watch and pray. So there's a difference between praying and watching, and yet praying should be accompanied by watching. What does it mean to watch? In the olden days of fortified cities, you would have different individuals who would stand as sentinels on the walls of the city. They would be watching, looking out to see if there was any danger approaching, so they could raise an alarm and allow preparations to be made to meet the danger. These were called watchmen. And so Jesus says that when we are praying, we should also be watching. In fact, I think watching precedes the prayer. See, many of us, we don't pray, or rather many times we don't pray because we don't recognize our need. And the reason we don't recognize our need is because we're not watching the trajectory in which our lives were going. We're not watching our circumstances. We're not watching the tests that are coming or that are already present in our lives. And therefore we feel no need to pray. But Jesus says here in Matthew chapter 26 that we should watch and pray lest we enter into temptation, because prayer is a follow-up to the watching experience. The third thing that we learn from the life of Jesus in Gethsemane is that when Jesus is praying, he goes and he prays on his own, and he says the same prayer 3 times. Jesus prayed the same prayer 3 times because he was prevailing in his prayer experience. Sometimes we get discouraged when God doesn't answer within the time frame that we want him to answer, or in the manner that we want him to answer. But Jesus was prevailing and persistent in his prayer experience. And I believe that his persistence was directly connected to his submission. At the end of each prayer, he would say, "Not my will, but your will be done." And so what this showed is that Jesus was giving himself up to whatever God saw best. And I believe that when we are less anxious about the outcome of things and we simply trust God to do what is right, we have more peace in our waiting experience. And that is actually what enables us to have perseverance. And so Jesus shows us that not only should we be persistent, but we should also be submissive in our prayer experience. There is power in the united and corporate prayer experience and worship experiences, but there can never be a substitute for personal prayer. There is also a need for watching unto prayer, so we can be able to recognize our danger as well as opportunities that we can be able to be a blessing to other people as well. And while we are praying and while we are watching, we should always be submissive to the will of God, being persistent until God demonstrates which way he thinks is best. So I want to encourage you, as Jesus said, that you should watch and pray lest you enter into temptation.